Have you ever witnessed a moment so catastrophic, so profoundly wrong, that the air itself seems to crystallize? A moment where a life, carefully built and polished for the world to see, shatters into a million pieces under the glare of 1,000 lights. Tonight, we take you inside the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis Legacy Gala, where the city's elite gathered to celebrate philanthropy and power. It was a night meant to honor one man's meteoric rise, but it will forever be remembered for one woman's unimaginable strength in the face of the ultimate betrayal. This is the story of a public kiss, a silent wife, and the 5 words that brought an empire to its knees. The ballroom was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers, heavy with Austrian crystal, dripped light onto a sea of silk, velvet, and tailored tuxedos. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the low hum of performative laughter and whispered negotiations. For Clara, the gilded cage, as she privately called it, had become her life's backdrop. Tonight, it felt particularly suffocating. Her hand rested instinctively on the gentle swell of her stomach, a silent conversation with the new life that kicked softly beneath the layers of her emerald gown. 7 months. 7 months of morning sickness, swollen ankles, and a profound bone-deep joy that felt like the only real thing in this glittering, hollow world. The baby was her anchor, her secret truth. Across the table, her husband Leo was holding court. He wasn't just in his element, he was the element, the magnetic force around which everyone else orbited. His laugh was a rich, confident baritone that sliced through the room's chatter, drawing more people into his circle. His smile, the one that had once been reserved for her across a rickety table in a tiny apartment, was now a public commodity, freely traded for admiration and influence. He was being honored tonight. The Visionary of the Year award for his real estate empire, a concrete and glass testament to his ambition. Their empire, that's what he called it. Clara watched him, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. She remembered the man who sketched blueprints on napkins, his eyes wild with dreams, his hands calloused from hauling materials himself. That man had needed her. He had seen her, not just as a beautiful woman on his arm, but as the co-architect of his vision. Her degree in structural engineering wasn't just a piece of paper. It had been the bedrock of their first projects, her calculations ensuring his grand designs didn't collapse under the weight of his own ambition. But that man was a ghost now, replaced by this polished, untouchable figure. He no longer sought her counsel on support beams and tensile strength. He consulted with a board of directors and a PR team. He no longer held her hand with a desperate grip that said, "We're in this together." He placed it on the small of her back with a proprietary firmness that said, "You belong to me." He's a marvel, isn't he? A woman named Beatrice, draped in diamonds that could fund a small nation, purred beside her. Everything he touches turns to gold. Clara offered a practiced, gentle smile. He's always been driven. The word felt inadequate, like using damp to describe a tsunami. Leo's drive was a force of nature, a relentless engine that had propelled them from nothing to this. A penthouse overlooking the park, a fleet of cars they never drove, and a table at a gala where their presence was a status symbol. But lately she wondered what that engine was fueled by. It used to be a shared dream. Now she feared it ran on something else entirely. Ego, adoration, and something colder. Her eyes scanned the room, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past year. She was looking for a shadow, a presence that had become a splinter in her mind, and she found it. Standing near the grand archway, cloaked in a gown the color of blood, was Serafina. She was Leo's head of public relations, a woman who had weaponized her own allure with terrifying precision. Her cheekbones were sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes, a piercing shade of gray, were locked on Leo. There was a predatory stillness about her, the calm of a shark that knows the tide is turning in its favor. Clara had felt the shift months ago. It wasn't one thing, but 100 small, sharp cuts. The late-night strategy sessions that left Leo's shirt smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, a heavy, cloying scent of jasmine and musk. The way he started guarding his phone like it was a state secret. The intimate, coded language they shared in meetings, full of inside jokes and shared glances that excluded everyone else, especially her. She had tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a cruel trick of pregnancy hormones. She had confronted him once, her voice trembling. "Leo, is there something going on with Serafina?" He had laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound. "Darling, don't be ridiculous. She works for me. She's brilliant, but she's an asset, not a threat. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. Don't you know you're my entire world?" He had tilted her chin up, kissed her forehead, and the conversation was over. A masterful performance of reassurance that did nothing to soothe the frantic bird of panic beating against her ribs. Tonight, watching them across the ballroom, the denial felt flimsy, pathetic. Serafina wasn't looking at Leo like an employee. She was looking at him with a raw, possessive hunger that mirrored the way he was smiling at his audience. They were two sides of the same coin, minted in ambition and polished with deceit. A waiter appeared offering champagne. Clara politely declined, her hand once again finding the curve of her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab, as if it could feel its mother's distress. She whispered to it, a silent promise. "I'll protect you, no matter what." The lights began to dim, and the master of ceremonies, a jovial TV personality, took the stage. "And now," his voice boomed, "the moment we've all been waiting for, to present our Visionary of the Year award, a man whose integrity and commitment to family values are as solid as the foundations he builds, Mr. Leo Vance." A spotlight found their table. The room erupted in applause. Leo stood, buttoning his jacket, the perfect picture of success. He leaned down to kiss her, but his lips were cool and distracted, his eyes already on the stage. "Wish me luck," he murmured, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. As he walked away, his back straight and his stride confident, Clara felt a cold dread wash over her, so intense it stole her breath. It was the feeling of standing on a beautifully constructed bridge, one she had helped design, and hearing the first sickening groan of metal fatigue, the first splintering of the foundation, knowing it was all about to come crashing down. The applause for Leo was a wave of sound that crashed over Clara, threatening to pull her under. As he ascended the stage, bathed in the adoring glow of the spotlight, her mind fled the suffocating present and sought refuge in the past. It was a defense mechanism, a way to remember the man she had loved before he became this monument to himself. She was transported back 12 years to a cramped fourth-floor walk-up that always smelled of turpentine from the artist downstairs and roasted garlic from their own tiny kitchen. They were broke, but they hadn't felt poor. They were rich in ideas, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared ferocious belief in a future they would build with their own hands. She remembered one night a thunderstorm rattling the window panes. Leo was hunched over the floor, which was covered in a sprawling, hand-drawn blueprint. It was his first solo project proposal, a community arts center. His brow was furrowed in frustration. "It won't work," he had muttered, tossing his pencil down. "The load-bearing walls, the budget for the steel framing is impossible. The whole design is a failure." Clara, then a graduate student, her hair tied in a messy knot, had knelt beside him. She'd spent hours looking at his drawings, not as a supportive girlfriend, but as a peer. She saw the beauty in his fluid, ambitious lines, but she also saw the structural flaws. "It's not a failure, Leo," she had said softly, her finger tracing a line on the paper. "It's a challenge. Your vision is magnificent, but you're trying to force it into a conventional frame. What if we use a combination of glulam beams and a reinforced concrete core? We can open up the interior space, reduce the steel cost, and make the structure itself a piece of art." He had looked at her, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, a spark of understanding in his eyes. For the next 3 hours they worked, their minds in perfect sync. He was the poet of space and light. She was the logician of stress and support. Together they found the solution. He got the contract. That night, holding her in their lumpy bed, he had whispered into her hair, "We did it, Clara. We did it. You're my foundation. Without you, I'm just a pile of bricks." That phrase, "my foundation," had become his term of endearment for her. It was the promise upon which their life was built. He was the soaring skyscraper, and she was the unseen, unglamorous, but absolutely essential bedrock that made his ascent possible. She'd left her promising career at a prestigious engineering firm to join him when he started Advanced Developments, becoming his silent, untitled partner. She reviewed every blueprint, caught every miscalculation, and ensured his dreams could withstand the laws of physics. She never asked for public credit. Seeing their shared vision rise into the city skyline was enough. A fresh wave of applause from the ballroom jolted her back to the present. Leo was at the podium now, his hand resting on the gleaming crystal award. His smile was dazzling, a 1,000-watt beacon of charm. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "I am humbled. Truly. A man is nothing without his vision, but a vision is nothing without the people who believe in it." Clara's heart clenched. He was using their old lines, the ones they'd rehearsed in the mirror of their tiny bathroom before his first big pitch. But the words, once so full of genuine humility, now sounded rehearsed and hollow, part of a script he had long since memorized. Her gaze drifted back to Serafina. She was standing now, partially obscured by a pillar, but her posture was rigid with anticipation. She looked like a runner at the starting block, waiting for the pistol shot. Why? Why did this moment feel so orchestrated? Another memory, this one more recent and far more painful, surfaced. It was 6 weeks ago. She had come home early from a prenatal appointment, the ultrasound picture, a grainy, miraculous image of their child, tucked in her purse. She'd walked into the house, her heart full, ready to surprise Leo. She found him in his home office with Serafina. The door was ajar. They weren't yelling. The silence was far worse. Serafina was standing before his desk, her arms crossed. Leo was leaning back in his chair, his face a mask of strained patience. "You promised, Leo." Serafina's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "You said after the Legacy Gala, you said it would be the perfect time to reshape the narrative." "And it will be," Leo had replied, his tone wary. "Just be patient, Serafina. This is complicated." "Complicated?" She had laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A pregnant wife is a complication. It's not a life sentence. We have a plan. The board is on my side. They see the future. Our future. Don't let a temporary biological condition derail everything we've worked for." Clara had backed away, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob. Reshape the narrative. A temporary biological condition. The clinical, brutal words had echoed in her mind for weeks. The baby wasn't a joy to them. It was a complication. She wasn't a wife. She was a narrative to be managed. Now in the ballroom, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The gala wasn't just about an award. It was a platform. The perfect time, as Serafina had called it. On stage, Leo was continuing his speech. "And to my team, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, your dedication is the steel in our towers." He paused, taking a sip of water. His eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, they met Clara's. She saw a flash of something in his gaze. Not love, not remorse, but a flicker of pity? It was the look one gives to something beautiful right before smashing it. He looked away quickly, his gaze sweeping over the audience until it landed, with deliberate intent, on the woman in the blood-red dress. The air in Clara's lungs turned to ice. It was happening. Right now. She could feel the tectonic plates of her life beginning to shift, the foundation she had so carefully built starting to crack, preparing to give way to an earthquake of his making. "There is one person in particular," Leo continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone, "without whom none of this would be possible." A collective sigh of sentimentality rippled through the audience. They leaned forward, expecting the obligatory, heartwarming tribute to the devoted wife. Cameras turned toward Clara, their lenses hungry for the reaction shot, the gentle, tearful smile of the woman behind the great man. She could feel the weight of their expectations, a physical pressure on her skin. Her face felt like a porcelain mask, fragile and cold. "Say my name," she pleaded silently, a desperate, childish prayer. "Leo, please, just say my name. Remember who your foundation is." Leo's eyes, however, remained fixed on the spot near the archway. "This person came into my life when Advanced Developments was just a name, a brand. I had the vision, yes, but she gave it a soul. She taught me how to communicate that vision, how to make the world see what I saw. She is more than a colleague. She is my muse." The word hung in the air, glittering and venomous. Muse. It was a word of intimacy, of inspiration, of a connection that transcended the professional. It was not a word a man used to describe his publicist. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. People began to shift in their seats, their heads turning from Leo on stage to Clara at the table, and then toward the archway, following his intense gaze. The journalists at the press table were scribbling furiously, their professional instincts smelling blood in the water. Clara's own blood ran cold. The mask was cracking. She could feel a tremor starting in her hands and willed it to stop. She would not fall apart, not here, not in front of them. She thought of the ultrasound picture, of the tiny, perfect spine, the fiercely beating heart. This was no longer just about her own heartbreak. It was about the child who deserved a mother, not a victim. On stage, Leo seemed to swell with a strange, reckless energy, as if he were drawing power from the room's confusion. He was no longer following a script. He was improvising, drunk on the drama he was creating. She has been my guiding star in the darkest nights, my sharpest critic, and my fiercest believer, he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction that was chillingly authentic. She is the architect of my public soul. He raised his hand, beckoning. Serafina, please come up here. The name was a gunshot in the silent room. Serafina stepped out from behind the pillar. The spotlight, as if on cue, swung from Leo to find her, bathing her in a halo of white light. Her red dress was a slash of defiance against the ballroom's muted tones. She didn't look surprised or shy. She looked triumphant. This was her coronation. She walked toward the stage, not with the hesitant steps of an employee, but with the measured, confident stride of a queen claiming her throne. The audience was utterly captivated, trapped in a state of suspended disbelief. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a public execution. Beatrice, the woman beside Clara, gasped, her hand flying to her diamond-encrusted throat. My God, she whispered, her eyes wide with horrified delight. Clara didn't watch Serafina's ascent. She couldn't. Instead, she focused on a single point of light reflecting off a water glass on her table. She anchored herself to it, narrowing her entire world down to that one insignificant sparkle. Breathe in, breathe out. The baby kicked again, a frantic flutter. I'm here, Mama. I'm with you. The sound of Serafina's heels clicking on the stage steps brought Clara's head up. She was beside Leo now, her hand possessively on his arm. They stood together, a new power couple being forged in the crucible of public humiliation. Leo looked down at her, his face alight with a feverish adoration that he hadn't shown Clara in years. Serafina, he said, his voice thick with emotion, holding up the crystal award between them. This isn't mine. It's ours. The room was so quiet that Clara could hear the frantic whirring and clicking of the cameras. They were vultures, documenting every nuance of her disgrace. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a morbid, collective stare. They were watching her, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They wanted tears, they wanted screams. They wanted the satisfying drama of the scorned, hysterical, pregnant wife. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. The shock was so profound it had burned away the panic, leaving behind something hard and clear. She was no longer a wife in that moment. She was a structural engineer, analyzing a catastrophic failure. She saw the flawed design, the compromised materials, the shoddy workmanship of the life she had been living. She saw it all with brutal, unforgiving clarity. Leo leaned in toward Serafina, his hand moving from her arm to cup her face. It was a gesture of exquisite tenderness, a gesture that had once belonged only to Clara. He was giving it all away. Their past, their intimacy, their future. He was liquidating every asset of their marriage right here on this stage. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck on the cheek. It was a deep, searing kiss, a declaration. His body angled toward Serafina, completely shutting Clara out of the picture, both literally and metaphorically. The cameras flashed in a blinding, percussive frenzy, capturing the image that would be on the front page of every paper by morning. The visionary, his award, and his muse. The wife, an inconvenient footnote, relegated to the shadows. The kiss was a physical blow. Clara felt the impact in her chest, a violent, concussive force that seemed to stop her heart. The world narrowed to a single horrific tableau under the glare of the stage lights. Her husband, the father of her child, claiming another woman as his own in the most public way imaginable. The cacophony of camera flashes was the only sound in the room, a series of staccato explosions that burned the image onto her retina. Leo's hand tangled in Serafina's dark hair. Serafina's hand on his chest, her fingers splayed over his heart. A tableau of passion and betrayal, perfectly framed for mass consumption. Time seemed to warp. A second stretched into an eternity. In that dilated moment, Clara's mind fractured, showing her a slideshow of her life with Leo. But now every image was tainted, recontextualized by this final, brutal act. She saw their wedding day, Leo whispering always against her ear, his promise now tasting like ash in her memory. She saw them painting the nursery just last month, Leo's hand resting on her belly, his eyes full of what she had mistaken for paternal awe, but now understood as guilt, or worse, pity. She saw every late night he'd worked, every business trip he'd taken, every distracted kiss, and understood that she had not been sharing him with his ambition. She had been sharing him with another woman. The kiss finally ended. They broke apart, but remained close, breathless, their foreheads touching. They were in their own world, a bubble of shared treachery, oblivious to the shockwave they had sent through the room. It was Leo who seemed to come to his senses first. His eyes, dazed and unfocused, slowly scanned the silent audience, and finally, inevitably, found Clara. The triumphant, feverish glow on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of dawning horror. It wasn't remorse, it was the look of a gambler who had pushed all his chips onto the table in a moment of reckless ecstasy and was only now beginning to calculate the cost of his bet. He had expected a private fallout, a messy scene behind closed doors. He had not anticipated this chilling, absolute silence, this collective, judgmental stare. And in that moment, as his eyes locked with hers, Clara realized something profound. He wasn't looking at her as his wife. He was looking at her as a problem to be solved, a piece of collateral damage in his grand redesign. The pain was a white-hot nova inside her, so immense it threatened to incinerate her from the inside out. The urge to act on it was primal, to scream, to throw a glass, to run from the room, sobbing, and give the vultures the dramatic scene they craved. Her body tensed, her nails digging into her palms, drawing blood. But then the baby kicked. It wasn't a gentle flutter this time. It was a hard, definitive thump, a tiny foot pressing against her ribs as if to say, "Stay, fight." And in that instant, another image flooded her mind, eclipsing all the others. It was a memory from her childhood, one she had buried deep. She was 10 years old, watching her own mother pack a suitcase, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her father, a man who had gambled away their savings, stood in the doorway, begging, promising to change. Her mother had hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, her spirit broken. She had stayed, and her life, and Clara's childhood, had been a long, slow surrender to a man who would never change. Clara had sworn to herself then, with the fierce, silent vow of a wounded child, that she would never be that woman. She would never allow her own child to witness her surrender. That single memory, that old, deep-seated trauma, became her armor. It fused with the raw, protective instinct of a mother-to-be, and in the crucible of her public humiliation, a new kind of strength was forged. The pain was still there, a living thing with claws and teeth, but it was no longer in control. She was. She slowly, deliberately relaxed her hands. She took a breath, not a shaky, panicked gasp, but a deep, centering inhalation that filled her lungs and calmed the frantic beating of her heart. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape of its legs on the polished floor sounding like a thunderclap in the silent room. And she stood up. Her movements were graceful, unhurried. She adjusted the emerald fabric of her gown over her belly, a gesture that was both maternal and regal. She did not look at Leo. She did not look at Serafina. She looked out at the hundreds of frozen faces, the sea of diamonds in judgment, and she met their gaze one by one. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer just the silence of shock. It deepened, thickened, becoming something else entirely. It was the silence of anticipation, the silence of a crowd that realizes the main event is not over. it has just begun. Every person in that ballroom, from the city's mayor to the busboys clearing glasses, was motionless. They had come expecting a predictable award ceremony. They had been given a scandalous drama, but now watching the pregnant, betrayed wife rise to her feet with the poise of a monarch, they sensed they were about to witness something far more rare, an execution of a different kind. The air crackled with a tension so palpable it felt electric. Leo and Serafina, frozen on stage, were no longer the center of attention. They were merely supporting actors. The spotlight, in every sense of the word, had shifted. It was now entirely on Clara. As Clara stood, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant clatter from the kitchens, the very pulse of the city outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own steady breathing. She was the calm at the center of a hurricane of her husband's making. On stage, Leo's face had gone ashen. The confident visionary had vanished, replaced by a man dangling over a precipice, finally understanding the height of his fall. Serafina, too, had lost her triumphant glow. Her hand, which had been resting so possessively on Leo's arm, had slipped away. She looked small and tawdry under the harsh lights, a co-conspirator in a crime that had suddenly become far more serious than she had anticipated. They had planned a coup, a strategic reshaping of the narrative. They had not planned for a revolution. Clara's gaze swept over the audience, and she saw not a faceless mob, but individuals. She saw the pity in some eyes, the morbid curiosity in others. She saw the barely concealed glee on the faces of Leo's rivals. And she saw, at a table near the back, the worried, compassionate face of her oldest friend, Mark, who had been Leo's best man and was now watching this nightmare unfold. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of support that fortified her resolve. She knew what they were all expecting: tears, recriminations, a messy, emotional scene that would confirm their preconceived notions of a woman scorned. They expected her to be the victim, the martyr in this sordid play. She would give them something else entirely. She did not start walking toward the stage to confront them. That would be their scene, on their terms. Instead, she turned and began to walk toward the host's podium at the side of the stage, which had been abandoned when the drama began. Her steps were measured and deliberate. The train of her emerald gown whispered behind her on the marble floor. With every step, she could feel herself shedding the identity that had defined her for the last 12 years. Leo Vance's supportive wife, the foundation, the woman behind the man. She was shedding it like a skin she had outgrown, and with every step she felt lighter, taller. She reached the podium. A microphone stood there, tall and slender. She adjusted it downward with a steady hand, the small movement echoing in the cavernous silence. She looked out at the room, her posture perfect, her chin high. There was no tremor in her hands, no quaver in her breath. There was only a profound, almost terrifying calm. "Good evening," she said. Her voice, amplified by the sound system, filled the entire ballroom. It was not the voice of a weeping victim. It was clear, calm, and resonant, with an undertone of steel. The two simple words cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. On stage, Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. Clara paused, letting the silence stretch again, commanding the room's absolute attention. She was not a guest at this gala anymore. She was its master. "I'd like to take a moment," she continued, her voice even and controlled, "to congratulate my husband, Leo, on his Visionary of the Year award. It is a testament to his remarkable ability to construct compelling narratives." A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. The polite, coded language of the elite had been breached. This was not a concession. It was a counterattack, delivered with surgical precision. She had taken their narrative, the one they had tried to reshape, and turned it into a weapon. Her eyes finally, deliberately, moved to meet Leo's. She looked directly at him, across the stage, across the chasm that had opened between them. "You once told me, Leo," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, drawing the audience in closer, "that I was your foundation, that without me, you were just a pile of bricks. I believed you." She let that hang in the air for a beat. "Tonight you've shown me the truth. A foundation is not a muse. It is not glamorous or exciting. It is simply the unseen, uncelebrated thing you stand on to reach greater heights. And once you're high enough, you forget it's even there." Her words were not angry, they were elegiac. It was a eulogy for their marriage, delivered with a quiet dignity that was more devastating than any scream could ever be. She then turned her gaze to Serafina, who visibly recoiled. Clara did not address her with contempt or rage. She addressed her with something far more dismissive: indifference. And to Ms. Renault, Clara said, using Serafina's formal surname, instantly demoting her from muse to employee, I wish you the best of luck with your newest project. I've reviewed the schematics. The design is ambitious, but I have serious concerns about the structural integrity. The foundation is compromised. The double meaning was brutally clear. The room was now utterly mesmerized. No one was eating. No one was drinking. No one dared even to breathe too loudly. They were witnessing a masterclass in composure, a public dismantling of two powerful people by a woman who had every right to be in a heap on the floor. Clara's hand came to rest once more on her belly. This was the final act. Leo and I, she announced, her voice ringing with newfound authority, are expecting our first child, a new life that will be built on a foundation of truth, strength, and integrity. Everything this award was supposed to celebrate. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. And that is why, effective immediately, I am not only leaving my husband, but I am also announcing the launch of my own firm, Bedrock Engineering. The silence was finally broken. A collective, audible gasp filled the ballroom. She had not only ended her marriage, she had declared war. She had taken his insult, the foundation, and turned it into her crown. The name hung in the air. Bedrock Engineering. It was more than just a clever name. It was a declaration of independence. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming her history, her talent, and her future in a single, perfectly chosen word. It was the name she and Leo had brainstormed on a placemat in a diner all those years ago for the firm they were supposed to build together. He had discarded it in favor of the more grandiose Vance developments. She had held on to it. The shock in the ballroom was palpable. They had expected a domestic drama, a messy divorce announcement. They had not expected a corporate coup. Clara had transformed a personal humiliation into a professional launching pad, and she had done it on her husband's stage, using his spotlight. Leo looked as if he had been physically struck. His face was a canvas of disbelief and dawning panic. She hadn't just left him, she had positioned herself as his direct competitor. More than that, she had subtly reminded the entire industry, everyone in this room who mattered, of her own credentials, the silent partnership that had been the secret to his success. The visionary had just been exposed as a man who couldn't even see the value of the woman standing beside him. Clara's voice, now imbued with a new, unshakable confidence, delivered the final, devastating blows. Bedrock Engineering will be dedicated to the principles of sound design, ethical practice, and unwavering integrity, she announced. We will build things that last, things you can trust, because a beautiful facade is worthless if the foundation is rotten. Every word was a perfectly aimed missile. She was no longer talking about buildings. Everyone in the room knew it. She had just authored the new narrative, and it was a story of her strength and his profound, irredeemable failure of character. She looked directly at Leo one last time. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a vast, empty space where her love for him used to be. So thank you, Leo, she said, her voice cool and final. Thank you for this award. And thank you for this clarity. You've given me a far greater gift than you could ever imagine. With that, she stepped away from the podium. She did not look back. She did not wait for a reaction. Her part in this play was over. She walked not toward the exit where the press was surely gathering, but toward her friend Mark's table. He was already on his feet, his own coat slung over his arm, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce loyalty. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders as she reached him. Let's go home, Clara, he said softly. As they walked toward a side exit, the spell that had held the ballroom captive finally broke. A tidal wave of noise erupted. People shouting, chairs scraping, the frantic clicking of phone cameras capturing her departure. It was chaos. But Clara heard none of it. She walked through the storm with a serene, almost surreal sense of peace. She had walked into this ballroom as Leo Vance's wife, a beautiful pregnant accessory. She was leaving as Clara Thorne, CEO of Bedrock Engineering. They slipped out a service exit into the cool night air, bypassing the frenzy at the front. A valet, recognizing Mark, quickly brought his car around. As she slid into the passenger seat, Clara finally allowed herself to exhale. A single tear, hot and heavy, traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of release. The gilded cage had burst open, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, free. Back in the ballroom, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Leo stood frozen on the stage, the crystal award feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. Serafina was trying to talk to him, her face a mask of frantic damage control, but he couldn't hear her. He could only see the empty space at his table, the ghost of his wife's presence. He had orchestrated the entire evening as his coronation, the moment he would formally trade his old life for a new, more exciting one. He had envisioned himself as a king, boldly choosing his new queen. He had never imagined his old queen would simply pick up her crown, melt it down, and forge it into a sword. The applause he had received now felt like a distant, mocking echo. The adoring faces in the crowd had turned into a gallery of judgment. His investors, his clients, his rivals, they had all witnessed his profound lack of character. He had won an award for integrity on the same night he had proven to the world he had none. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost his foundation. And he was beginning to understand, with a terror that clawed at his throat, that without it, he was nothing but a pile of bricks about to come tumbling down. The next morning, the city awoke to the story. It wasn't just gossip, it was a headline. "Visionary's Gala Gambit backfires," screamed the front page of the Financial Times. The society pages were even less kind. "The wife's revenge, a bedrock of strength." The image was everywhere. Leo and Serafina in their passionate stage-lit kiss, a picture of reckless indulgence. But the stories weren't about them. They were about Clara. Overnight, she had become a symbol. Her calm, dignified speech was transcribed and quoted, her final words becoming a mantra for scorned women everywhere. A beautiful facade is worthless if the foundation is rotten. Social media lit up with the hashtag bedrock strength. She was lauded not as a victim, but as a strategist. A woman who had faced the ultimate public betrayal and responded not with tears, but with a business plan. The fallout for Leo was immediate and catastrophic. By 9 a.m., two of his primary investors had called for an emergency board meeting. The family-oriented charity he had been a patron of publicly severed ties, citing a fundamental misalignment of values. A major municipal contract that had been all but guaranteed was suddenly put under review. The narrative that Serafina had been so keen to reshape had been hijacked and rewritten by Clara. And in this new version, Leo was the villain. Serafina, the supposed victor, found her triumph had turned to ash. She had miscalculated spectacularly. She thought she was deposing a meek, compliant wife. She hadn't realized she was starting a war with a brilliant engineer who knew all the structural weaknesses in the empire Serafina wanted to rule. Instead of being seen as a powerful partner, she was painted as a ruthless homewrecker, a facade specialist who had helped a fool destroy his life. Her career in public relations was likely over. She had orchestrated the worst PR disaster of the decade. Meanwhile, in a quiet, sunlit apartment that Mark had lent her, Clara was taking the first steps of her new life. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and even potential investors. She ignored them all. Her first call was to her obstetrician to schedule a checkup. Her second was to a real estate agent to find a small office space. For the first few days, she allowed herself to grieve. Not for the man Leo had become, but for the man he had been. For the love they had lost long before that fateful night. She grieved for the family she thought she was building. She allowed the pain to wash over her, acknowledging it without letting it drown her. She cried for the past, but her eyes remained firmly on the future. A week later, she found it. A small, dusty office on the third floor of an old brick building with large windows overlooking a park. It was a world away from the sleek, glass and steel headquarters of Vance Developments. It was perfect. Armed with her laptop, her life savings, and a fierce, unshakable resolve, she began to work. She incorporated bedrock engineering. She designed a simple, elegant logo. She started calling old contacts, contractors and architects who had respected her work when she was the silent force behind Leo. The response was overwhelming. People had not forgotten her talent. They had seen what happened at the gala, and were eager to align themselves with her brand of integrity. A small but prestigious contract to consult on a historic library renovation came through. It wasn't a skyscraper, but it was a start. It was hers. She worked with a quiet, relentless focus. The long hours were fueled not by ambition for wealth or fame, but by a deep, primal need to build something safe and stable for her child. The nursery in the penthouse was a distant memory. Now she sketched designs for a new one in a small two-bedroom apartment she planned to rent, a cozy, protected space built on a foundation of love and honesty. Her pregnancy became her metronome, the steady rhythm of the growing life inside her, marking the passage of time and the progress of her own rebirth. She was no longer just waiting for a baby. She was building a world for it to be born into. One rainy afternoon, 2 months after the gala, a package arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside was a simple, leather-bound journal. The first page contained a single handwritten note. It was from Leo. Clara stared at the note, her heart giving a painful, involuntary lurch. It was his handwriting, the same bold architectural script that had once filled their lives with love notes and blueprints for their future. For a moment she considered throwing it away, unopened. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, won out. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. Clara, there are no words to excuse what I did. Sorry is a pathetic, hollow word for the devastation I caused. I was a fool, intoxicated by the light and the noise, and I smashed the most beautiful thing in my life without a thought. I didn't just lose you, I lost myself. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to have this. It's the original journal from our first year, the one where we sketched out everything. The Arts Center, our first house, Bedrock. It belongs to you. It was always your vision more than mine. I heard about the library project. It's a beautiful design. You were always better with foundations than I was. Leo, what sure you was too. She slowly turned the pages of the journal. There it was, their shared past, captured in faded ink. Sketches, calculations, dreams. On one page, a detailed drawing of a cradle he had designed for their future child, with her engineering notes scribbled in the margins to make it stable. The note was not an apology designed to win her back. It was a confession, a concession, an acknowledgement of the truth she had declared on that stage. He finally understood. She closed the journal and placed it on her desk. It was not a painful reminder anymore. It was an artifact, a piece of a past she had survived and learned from. She felt a surprising sense of peace settle over her. She didn't need to forgive him, not for his sake. But in that moment, she let go of the last vestiges of her anger, for her own. He was no longer a monster in her story. He was just a man who had lost his way, a pile of bricks left behind as she continued to build. 6 months later, Clara stood in the newly completed nursery of her own apartment. The evening sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the simple, elegant crib and the bookshelf filled with stories she couldn't wait to read. Bedrock Engineering was thriving. She had a small, dedicated team, and they were gaining a reputation for excellence and integrity. She was respected. She was fulfilled. She was happy. A sharp kick from within reminded her that she was not alone. She smiled, resting her hands on her belly. Soon, she whispered, almost time to meet you, little one. She looked out the window at the city skyline. Towers of glass and steel, many of which Leo had built, glittered in the setting sun. They no longer looked like monuments to her own erased contributions. They were just buildings, part of a landscape that she was now helping to shape on her own terms. She was no longer the foundation for someone else's dream. She was the architect of her own life, and she was building it on bedrock, solid, true, and unbreakable. Her past was a blueprint, her present was the work site, and her future, held safely within her, was the most magnificent structure of all. Clara faced an impossible choice in a moment of unimaginable pain. She could have crumbled, and the world would have understood. Instead, she chose to build. She reminds us that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength, and that true power isn't about the stage you're on, but the ground you stand on. And now we turn the question to you. Imagine yourself in that ballroom. The lights, the stairs, the ultimate betrayal unfolding before the world. What would you have done? Would you have walked away in silence? Would you have confronted him in a storm of righteous anger? Or would you, like Clara, have found a way to turn your deepest heartbreak into the foundation of a new life? Let us know in the comments below.